Thank you, Gunter. I think you've really introduced the rest of the panel quite nicely, actually. You've raised pretty much every topic we're going to speak about. Before we get to the discussion, I want to start, Graciela, with your innovation and your technology. Just to give you an introduction to Professor Chichilnisky, she designed and created the carbon market, which is in the Kyoto Protocol, which, if you remember, came into law in 2005. First, we want to show you a video about what Global Thermostat is doing.
From the atmosphere and makes it into useful products while cleaning the atmosphere.
So the companies come up with the idea to pull carbon out of the atmosphere to literally vacuum out and reverse the damage that we've already done.
If you think of a dehumidifier, it takes the water molecules from air. Our product does the same. But instead of taking water, you're taking CO2. We call it carbon negative.
Taking one of the most ambitious approaches to handling reversal of climate change on the planet.
Our technology is very, very, very low cost, and that's key. We don't use electricity, we use low temperature heat. We can produce CO2 in any amount practically, wherever you need. And we can do it all while making profits, creating jobs. It's a win-win-win.
So I think we missed one of the killer lines in there, which is that Forbes actually says that your technology has the potential to reverse climate change.
That's correct.
So tell me about, you've got 3 plants in operation now. Tell me about why it works so well.
Because instead of using electricity to run it, we use low temperature heat. It is like a giant dehumidifier, but instead of taking water from the air, it takes CO2. And it uses CO2 as a feedstock for the economy. CO2 mixed with hydrogen makes gasoline. CO2 is used for desalinating water, is used for food, is used for carbonated beverages, is used for materials such as polymers, plastics, and carbon fibers. CO2 can replace petroleum as the feedstock of the 21st century. And it can do so while cleaning the atmosphere. So our technology removes CO2 from the atmosphere, which is the only way the UN now says we can avert catastrophic climate change. And that CO2 that we remove replaces petroleum and can be used to grow the economy while cleaning the atmosphere. That is how we can reverse climate change. And it is true, the computations show we can reverse climate change.
Tell me some of the products that you're already producing.
Coca-Cola uses a lot of CO2. They use millions of tons of CO2 for carbonated beverages. The CO2 that we take from air goes into carbonated beverages like Coca-Cola, and the moment that you drink that Coca-Cola, you are cleaning the atmosphere. Another example is carbon fibers. The boats that we saw in this excellent presentation, thank you, most of them, the overwhelming majority of the boats, are made with carbon fiber. Carbon fiber is replacing all metals. It replaces steel, which is a $1 trillion market. It replaces aluminum. It's made from CO2. So you can actually make all this furniture, all of this, from air.
I mean, I think that's extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah, because air contains sufficient CO2 to make all the polymer you need to produce all these materials. And all you need to do is bring the CO2 where it shouldn't be, which is in the atmosphere, where we put it out, bring it down, and use it for economic progress that cleans the atmosphere. That is our model, and that's how it works.
So thank you for that. I want to hear from the rest of the panel. So I want to talk a little bit about the carbon market that you designed, which is an interesting segue into what Laszlo Giricz is doing. Now, you're putting carbon on the blockchain. Tell me what that means, and tell me about what happens when I go to Ben & Jerry's in London to get my ice cream now.
Yeah, thank you, Edie. We were looking at all the different ways how humans challenge the atmosphere and challenge the environment. People often talk about saving the planet, but let's be honest, the planet doesn't need saving. We need to preserve an environment in which we can survive, because if we keep screwing up, then we just disappear. In a few million years, there's going to be somebody else living here. So we were looking at what are we humans doing that is damaging the environment. Obviously, a huge contributor to climate change is the emission of greenhouse gases. We have carbon and other greenhouse gases that are being emitted. And one of the really heartbreaking developments that we see in the world is the deforestation that happens all around the world, especially in very precious rainforests and national parks in places like the Peruvian Amazon. Cordillera Azul is one of the projects we're working on. And what we've been realizing while we were studying this topic is that the rate of deforestation is a shocking 27 soccer fields every minute. I mean, you have to really visualize that. Every minute of every hour of every day, the whole year, humans cut down 27 soccer fields worth of forestry. That's like something like 480, 500 trees every second. It's ridiculous. So when we looked at climate change and at all the different ways, I feel industries need to work together to really be successful with climate action. We thought one of the key areas we want to focus on is forest conservation. And it's not only about carbon, it's about the biodiversity we protect there, it's about the local communities. Did you know that only about 10% of all the plant life in the Amazon is understood and categorized? Yet 25% of all the world's medicine comes from the Amazon? The wealth we have there and we're destroying blindly is just incredible. So we've taken that and we've said, all right, what we need is we need to give local communities an alternative. Because somebody in the rainforest doesn't wake up and say like, hey, I feel like destroying my habitat today. They do that because they don't see an alternative. They're being approached by companies that do illegal mining or palm oil plantations, and they say, hey, you know what? If you help us cut down your trees and put up something that we will pay for, then we'll help you have an income. We go to those same communities and say, we give you an alternative. We show you how to plant cocoa or do a wide range of other activities that can then be sold into the world, like cocoa can be turned into chocolate bars, sold in a fair trade setup. And we help these local communities with these sustainable development projects to come to a point where they can say no to illegal miners. How do you do that? So when you protect a rainforest, and it's very scientific, I don't want to go too much into that, but when you protect the rainforest, what you're basically stopping is the burning of the trees that were cut, which is around 2% of the rainforest per year is being cut down. And those trees that are now not being cut down and not being burned, they keep storing the carbon dioxide they have been sequestering over 400 plus years. That's the average age of a tree in a mature rainforest. And that gives you a product called a carbon credit, which we now heard who invented it, which is such an honor to sit next to you. And we take those carbon credits and we sell them. Now, the interesting thing is we didn't invent carbon credits. We now know who did. And carbon markets have been around for a long time. But they are nascent. They are not really growing. They're not really working. Given the challenges we have, and climate change is a really existential threat to not only human life, the carbon market should be the largest market in the world. I mean, it should move more money than any other market, but it doesn't. And the reason is because the carbon markets are complicated, there are very high barriers of entry. If you go from the west coast of Canada to the east coast of Canada, you have multiple different carbon markets. They're all regulated in a different way. It's a very challenging environment. So we said, yes, governments want to do something, and they should, but it takes them time to implement change. Yes, corporates want to do something, and they should, and there are some great initiatives out there, but they also have other priorities. So we looked at who can really do something quickly, and that is every one of us. It's the retail market. Now, carbon markets today work in tons. You can buy and sell tons of carbon credit. By taking carbon credits from these rainforests, and again, there's a wide range of different carbon credits, we're really focusing on forest conservation of mature rainforests, taking those carbon credits and putting them onto a blockchain platform, and we have done a lot of analysis, and we've chosen Stellar as the most environmental friendly platform. So everybody has heard about Bitcoin using the electricity of a sizable country. Stellar doesn't do that. That's why we've chosen them. They're very environmental friendly. And by having the carbon credits on that platform, we're now able to sell grams of carbon, and that's an absolute game changer. By being able to transact grams of carbon credit in almost real time, we do a transaction in about 3 seconds, for a cost that's negligible. It's lots of zeros and a number cents per transaction, so we're not even worried about that. By being able to transact these grams so fast and so cost effective, we can now introduce them into the retail sector. So you mentioned Ben & Jerry's. We're very, very proud to have Ben & Jerry's as our first pilot. We started in May, so we've been running for 2 months now without any fault, and the feedback from the customers was fantastic. People are now able to walk into Ben & Jerry's, buy a scoop of ice cream, and with a micro donation, offset the carbon footprint of the entire life cycle of that ice cream. Because people think, okay, if I want to offset the carbon footprint, then that's going to cost a lot of money, and I don't even want to look at that. But it's actually really tiny. So we analyzed, together with Ben & Jerry's, the carbon footprint of 1 scoop of ice cream, and the entire life cycle, from the cows and the milk, and bringing it to the plant, making ice cream, shipping it to the shop, all that together turns out to be less than 1 penny. So Ben & Jerry's has come and said, like, that's fantastic. We sell a scoop of ice cream for £3.20. We're now going to internally make that £3.19 and add the penny, so for the consumer it stays £3.20. But this scoop of ice cream is now climate action, because they're supporting more forest conservation that stops the release of more carbon into the atmosphere than they are actually emitting when they're producing that ice cream.
And they give the opportunity to the consumer, to the person buying the ice cream, to contribute as well.
Exactly, and it was one of the most amazing moments of my life. So this is maybe not the best analogy, but it was a little bit like giving birth to a baby. I've been working on Poseidon for over a year, and when we started this pilot at Ben & Jerry's, I was nervous. In my head, there were 2 possible scenarios. So you go into Ben & Jerry's, you choose your scoop of ice cream, which is the most difficult part of the journey because they have amazing flavors. And you go to the cashier with your ice cream and you want to pay. And the cashier then says, hey, we have partnered with Poseidon. We're giving 1 penny towards forest conservation. Would you like to match that? And in my head, these 2 scenarios were, yes, I'd love to give a penny to that, or no, I don't feel like doing this. But what happened was completely different. Consumers came and said, like, oh, that's great, make it £4. Mind-blowing. So we have shown over the last 2 months that consumers don't only like the concept of participating in climate action with micro-donations, they go above and beyond the calling.
Yeah.
And we're now in talks with multiple companies about scaling. We have some exciting partnerships that I can talk about too today. The city of Liverpool has partnered with us. We're working.
Let me pause you there, and because I want to pick up on something that you just mentioned, which was about bringing other people into the discussion. And Eric, I want to bring that over to you, because what you're doing picked up on something that Gunter mentioned earlier about none of this is going to work unless we bring education into the realm. Picking up on the fact that consumers do want to do something, they want to participate in climate action, tell me how you structure your company so that when you go into a new territory, you're not just putting in a solar panel or putting in wind, but you're changing the environment and the economy of the region.
I don't know if we can get the picture, just one picture, you know, the drawing, so it will be easier to illustrate the example. Yes, no?
It's coming up.
It's coming up. Okay, just to be clear, we are an IPP, independent power producer, so we are developing, financing, building and operating renewable energy plants in the world. So thanks to that, we are very lucky because we have a very stable business. Let's say today, 15 years ago, it was different. Next slide, just the next slide. Today, everybody understands what is renewable energy. So as Gunter said, what is the most important to understand today, and I will say just one word, is innovation is not only technologies. Technologies is great, but it's what you do with the technology which is the most important. So as Akuo Energy, what we do is, since we are pushing for a decentralized way to produce energy, we are in the middle of territories around the world in 30 countries. And it's always the same. You arrive in a territory, and you have to analyze and look at the territory and see what you can bring to this territory, because you're going to be able to use the sun, the wind, and from this territory. And the idea was to give back immediately to the citizen. I give you one example. It's in south of France. This is a real project under construction. So we started from former quarries. So this is a lost space. This quarries has been used to build the city of Avignon years ago. So as a mayor of a city like that, what do you do with that? There is no business model for that. So the idea was to use floating solar panel system to build a solar plant. And there comes the innovation. The innovation is, as a private company, we own our shares, and we decide as a shareholders that we were not really interested only in the cash flow of the next 20 years from these solar projects. The idea was to put a long-term view on our revenues and to use part of our revenues to finance other activities within the territory. And one of the first one we've been pushing on this territory. So I've been talking about energy transition with the solar panel. Now we're going to talk about agricultural transition. We all know that in the future, and the future is now, it's urgent. We cannot continue to have to produce food like we used to produce in the last century. It's over. We're all going to die from that. So we are financing organic agriculture, permaculture, and from what? From part of the benefit of the solar plant, we are financing. We have absolutely no expectation of return from the farmers. They will make their own business, but they need help to switch because you have to take care of the land, and it takes 2-3 years to regenerate the land. So they need to have salaries during that time. So we're paying them just to take care of the land and to grow organic food. What do we do with those organic food? We are selling it to the canteen, to the kids of the 3 towns around the territory. One other transition which is very important is how do you give the chance to the citizen to give cents to their savings. So the idea was very simple, was to launch a website, a crowdfunding website called Akuo Cup, and any citizen around this territory could invest in the solar plant, in the project, directly. So that's a new way to do finance. No intermediation between the citizen and the power plant. And of course, we needed to change the mentalities from the politicians. And the politicians, they organize a vote. Do we really want this type of project within the territory? So they organized that, and they even got the authorization from the citizen to invest the money of the city within the project. This is a good way to save the money of the city and to invest the money of the city, because this is a very reliable project over the years. To finish, if we want to reproduce, to copy this type of projects, the most important is education. So every 2 weeks, we got people from the company going to the schools around and talking with the kids and managing programs. You'll see managing programs to explain that there is a future, and the future could be different, and the future could be exactly the way it's organized around this project. So this is not science fiction. This is just a simple innovation. This is pragmatism. And this is the way we could organize the future of some territories around the world.
And when you go to different territories, there's a different solution. So near Avignon, it's solar, but you also use wind, you use biomass.
Yes, in Île de la Réunion, for example, this is an island where you have a hurricane. So there, what we've done, to save the space, we didn't want to compete with agricultural land. What we've done is we built greenhouses which are resisting to hurricane. So we keep 100% of the land for agriculture, but we are using the verticality of the greenhouse to produce energy. So that's another example. Of course, this is feasible with any type of renewable energy. Renewable energy is just a tiny part of the project, which is stabilizing the business model. But for that, you need a company which is accepting to make less money than their competitors on the short term. But our view is long term. We take 50-year, 70-year position on the territory. So that's the way it works. It's really a new financial model to propose another way to structure our territories. And this is good for Africa. We're doing that in Africa because the main problem, you have to understand that we will not stop migration. This is not possible. In the history of the world, we never stop 50 million people who wants to cross the Mediterranean Sea. It doesn't work like that. So the only solution is development in Africa. This is the type of development we can carry on in Africa today, and that's the only solution to solve the problem of migration we have today.
Thank you. So Neil, I want to turn to you, and you've got a different solution as well. And Gunter showed us his ship, which is sailing with kites. Now you have a different approach to using wind to getting ferry ships and ships with cargo across the ocean. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yes. Yes, I'm developing a sail shipping company using different technologies, but what we must understand is that the wind energy is the future of shipping propulsion, and so we can use kite or wing sails or turbo sails, but this is the main point. So we want to use the wind to reduce the fuel consumption of cargo ships and to reduce the carbon footprint. And so the particularity of our project is that we use these wing sails. We work with a very famous architect, Mark van Petegem, who developed for the first time 10 years ago the wing sails on the America's Cup. It was a groundbreaking innovation in the sailing world because wing sails generate a lift 2 times higher than classic sails. So this is the point. If we want to use the wind again, we cannot use old clippers like in the past, but we must use the wind in a very modern, automated and cost-effective manner. And I think now it's time. I'm completely convinced that in 10 or 15 years, we will see many cargo using the wind. I don't know if it will be mine, but I'm sure that the wind is part of the future of the shipping.
And tell us about the performance of the ship. You still use fuel, you still at the moment depend on fuel, but tell me how it affects how much less fuel you can use.
in fact, it depends on what are your the performances you want to reach. Today, we have no choice. We are forced to respect the same performances compared with the classic motor ships. So if we want to guarantee the same transit speed and the same, how do you say, punctuality, yeah? You have to use the engine when there is no wind or when the wind is in front of you, yeah. So we are okay with the fact that if there is no wind, we will use our engine. So the economy we are able to do is very variable. For example, let's say we go from Monaco to Genova. One time you will save 10%, and on the way back you will save 50%. But we managed to master this variability by using routing software developed by our partner, and it allows us to calculate the average savings we are able to do. These savings are varying on if we use the boat in Mediterranean or in North Europe, but we are around 30% of savings. So you can think that 30% is quite low, but on cargo ships, which are burning around 100 tons of heavy fuel oil a day, saving 30 tons a day is great already.
Amazing. Gunter, I wonder if you could reflect on what you've heard from these solutions. And there's one other thing, actually, before I get you to do that. Can I ask you, did you focus on diapers because you have 5 kids? 6 kids?
I have 6 kids. Yeah, I mean, the guilt feeling is, of course, a very important motivator. And I just could never imagine. The first 2 kids, we did all the washing. And then, of course, my wife started complaining about the environmental impact of all the water we were using, etc. So, you know, what is very important is we have thousands of solutions already there. Thousands. Unfortunately, most of them remain good anecdotes and good cases, and we don't scale to the point that we change statistics. We are not changing statistics. So what are we doing wrong? Because we're thinking too small, we're thinking too local. And this is one of the major impacts that we're looking for, is how can we really scale it and speed it to the point that you're impacting statistics. And that is why fora like this is important. I mean, let's be honest. For our 200 plus projects, we mobilize more than 5 billion euros. 5 billion euros is nothing in the world of finance. It's totally marginal. So while people say, oh, this is great, I'm saying, you know, hey guys, if we're not getting to the 500 billion, we're nowhere. And this is really the shift we need to make. But that shift will only happen if we have more young kids challenging mom and dads about the solutions that they're thinking are good. We are too soon too happy with little progress. I mean, I am very clear on that. Stealing less is stealing. We agree? If you're a thief and you steal less, you're still stealing, right?
Right.
If you're emitting less CO2, you're still emitting CO2, right?
Right.
I mean, it doesn't give you the right to steal less and get sent to prison, and the other one who pollutes less gets an environment award. I mean, who invented that system? I mean, we have to stop giving awards to people who only do less bad. We have to do more good. And that is on one important premise: change the business models. That means you need to have multiple cash flows, as you're doing correctly. You need to have future markets and option markets like you could probably create related to these projects. And you need to start combining multiple technologies. But it all hinges on the new business model. As long as we stick to the core business, core competence, translated into a business model with an ROI, forget it. Our business plans, we don't write. It is not possible on the back of the envelope, we don't do it. We refuse to use Excel spreadsheets. Refuse. because it doesn't give us the right view of where we're going. And we have mobilized the money. Why? Because we need to start talking about a new class of investors, which I call the legacy investor. The investor, as you were saying, who's going for the 20, 30 years. And we know it in our company, our plastics company, which is Novamont. We have 4 factories now in Italy. You know, none of our investors gets an exit within 25 years. Eh? If you're in for a quick exit, I don't want your money.
Graciela, go on.
I completely agree with that.
Here.
I completely agree with that. I wanted to say something about what we're doing on the direction. Humans are putting 36 gigaton of CO2 into the atmosphere every year. 36. My next scale up is to remove 1 gigaton, which means 1 billion tons of CO2. We're doing that with companies such as Exxon. And that is that we already raised $50 million for our company, which is 8 years old, a bit less than 8 years old. But now we have to go to the gigaton level. Once we get to the gigaton level, then we can do 36 gigaton. At that moment, we will have reversed climate change.
And you said
This
you only
can be
needed,
done, and it will be done.
and you said you only needed to build 30 to 40,000 plants in order to do this, which
Right.
actually doesn't seem like that much.
That's correct. 30 to 40,000 plants, and of course, we only built 3 so far.
Got a
So
few more
it-
to go.
Yeah, it's a few to go, but we can computed that 10 to 20 years, I think closer to 20 years, 30,000 plants with 1 million tons of CO2 removed from here, which is a perfectly reasonable size, will reverse climate change. And it is the only way, incidentally, of reversing climate change, because the trees, as perfect as they are, will take too long because they're very slow. They are extremely important, but they're very slow. Therefore, this is what has to be done. And the United Nations and the Paris Agreement and the IPCC, they all say what we must do is massive removal of CO2 from the atmosphere. Gigatons. That's what we're doing. And that can be done. He's right.
I would like to
Laszlo.
add something to that. So first, it's such a humbling experience to sit with so many amazing panelists. I think this is the best panel I've ever been on. But you two said 2 words that are really close to my heart. Gunter, you spoke about scalability. I couldn't agree more with you. That's really is the way how to solve any issue, right? If we do something in a big scale, it's very different than doing something that can scale across the planet. That's what we're so excited about with our retail integration, because we can take what we've done at Ben & Jerry's, roll it out to all Ben & Jerry's, roll it across all the Unilever brands, and scale and scale and scale. And that works, because if you ask somebody on the street, hey, can you give me $10,000 to protect forests in the Amazon, they will tell you, I don't have $10,000 to give you. You ask the same person, would you pay 20 pennies more when you buy a pair of shoes to rebalance the climate impact? I said, 20 pennies, of course. But over the year, he probably has given more than 10,000. And that's scalability. It's beautiful. It really works.
Yes.
And what you've been saying, I'd like to add a little bit to this. What you said, that trees are not very effective in removing carbon out of the atmosphere. And it's true, it's a slow process. It's a slow process, but we need to look at, when we look at climate change and when we look at climate action, in my opinion, we need to look at what we can do today, what we can do tomorrow, and what we can do in the future. We need to think about all these different timescales. And the technologies that are being developed, they're amazing and we need them. Companies moving from burning coal to using amazing technologies like what Gunter has described, that's amazing, and we do need that. At the same time, we also need to stop the harmful things we do, because I just give one quick analogy. If you step into your kitchen and you see the kitchen sink overflowing and the water is all on the floor, will you now spend the rest of the day mopping up the water, or will you go first to the sink and close the tap? Because what we're doing at the moment is we're mopping the water. And we need to do all those things together.
Eric, tell me how easy it is for you to scale. Have you found it easier over the course of the 15 years that you've been doing this?
It's easier today than 50 years ago, of course. The main thing is financing. First, what I like to say is to reverse climate change. The most urgent thing to do is to change our mindset.
Yes.
That's the most important. So I like what you do. This is important. That will help. But we still have to think that trees is biodiversity and it's the old balancing. So we will not replace the planet and the nature, the modern nature, with technology. We have to forget about that. So
Or it would be a very sad life.
Yeah. And you never know the impact of reversing, you know. So what is important is the changing year, the turning point is the COP21. For 2015. For one reason, is when the financial industry has understood that they have a huge responsibility in the way to fight against climate change. That was a very important turning point. So they started to think about changing their investment policy. To be honest, they started to change because they understood that maybe the investment policy they had before was over. They will make less money in the future if they're still pushing for oil and gas because it's not possible anymore. So scalability, it's possible today because Gunter said 5 billion is nothing. It's just nothing. If we decide, like Lester Brown wrote in the 80s in his book, that all the money we have we will dedicate it to what is essential for human being. We have a huge possibility to scale up today because the mindset of the financial industry is changing, not fast enough, but it's changing. I'm very optimistic, it's changing. So if we have the money, if we have the mindset changing, people are starting to understand. I told you about the movie we co-produced in 2015, Demain. It was a documentary. So in France, a documentary, if you have 50,000, 70,000 people buying a ticket to go to see a documentary, that's a huge success. We sold 1.2 million tickets in France. So we sold the movie in 30 countries. People are ready to change. Just show them the solutions. And we have all the solutions are existing. The only purpose is how can we speed up to show those solutions to the people. So that would be a way to scale up, to accelerate the scaling up of what we're all doing on this panel today.
I'm going to come back to Graciela. I know you want to respond, but I want to ask Nils, you're having trouble getting companies to accept your technology. So it's not just that we need consumers to change, but actually we need maritime law to change as well.
Yeah, the laws are changing, but not fast enough. And the main problem for us is quite obvious, is that the fuel is not expensive enough, because I will say something completely obvious, but we pay the fuel, the cost, the money it costs to take it from the ground to the pump, but we don't pay the huge, the dramatic externalities of the fuel consumption. So as soon as you play this unfair game, it's complicated to develop these technologies. And I would like to say something which is a little bit out of the scope, but we understand today that we are deeply destroying the planet. It's not a film, it's getting true. And we are talking as if by developing our solution, we could save the planet, which is, I think, deeply false. And we must stop to say that you guys can continue to live as we live today with our level of our standard of living. And I mean that Eric will not save the planet with his solar panels alone. We must first divide by 3 our energy consumption, and then after the energy we use, produce it with solar panels. On the same way, I will not save the planet only with our sailing cargo ship. We must first divide by 3 the international trades, and then after the 30% remaining, use sailing cargo ships. This thing, I think, the point.
Graciela, I know you want to say something. I'm going to let you have the last word, and then we'll wrap up, okay?
Quite a responsibility.
Huge.
Yeah, it's a great panel. Thank you so much. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you. But what everybody's pointing to is that we need to change values. We need to change values. Right now, there is no value for trees. There is no for standing trees. There is no value for clean water. There is no value to a clean atmosphere except what comes from the carbon market, which is a value for that. The economics that we have gives all the wrong values. Therefore, the example that I give is that if we take all the trees in the United States and we cut them and we make toilet paper, the economy of the US will show tremendous improvement. That, I have nothing against toilet paper. I'm just trying to.
I'm against.
But I wanted to explain that as an economist, we must change values, and that means, listen to this, it's unusual, but it's true. It means that we need to create markets because markets create economic value. The prices of markets create economic value. Like the carbon market, which I created, gave a value to a clean atmosphere. We need now 3 types of global markets to change values and economic values and change the entire global economy and capitalism along with it. A market for water, what I call the blue market, a market for biodiversity, and a market for the atmosphere or a carbon market. With those 3 global markets in place, we have changed values and sufficiently that we measure economic progress in a way which is consistent with human survival. And then everything that we're talking here starts making a different sense. Nothing short of changing the global economy is going to work. We need to change our notion of economics and our measurement of economic progress. This can be done through the creation of these markets without changing the system, although the system itself will be changed by the creation of these markets. And this must be done. Otherwise, human beings in the pursuit of economic progress are going to go extinct, essentially.
So, now that we've solved all those problems, I'm going to invite you to join us up in the marketplace for a coffee where we can discuss why Gunter doesn't like toilet paper. And we'll come back for a discussion about what you eat. So have a think about while you're eating your delicious, I hope they have the coconut macaroons again, while you're having your cookie and your coffee, thinking about what you're eating. And when we come back, we'll be discussing We Are What We Eat. Thank you. Thank you.